Okay, so here today we have our self-preserving ginger paste, our self-preserving garlic paste, our tortillas made with coconut oil and milk, our spice mix, our fajita mixture vegetables, and our fruit and tomato salsa. The consistency won't change, just all of the oil will melt and it'll heat up enough that it's warm to the touch but it won't scald you. So you don't want to boil the milk, you don't want to even simmer it, you just want to heat it up. Okay, so now that we've heated up the milk and the oil, we're going to mix it into a well in our plain flour. You don't need to add all of it in the first go, just enough like that, maybe half. Do make sure that you've turned your hob off, so you're not burning anyone. And then you just want to slowly mix it in. You can use your hands, but obviously it's been on the hob, so it'll be warm. You want to keep one hand clean and dry, and the other one can get wet and floury. Just means that if you need to touch anything with anything, you're not going to get the rest of your kitchen messy. And then you want to slowly add in the rest. Now that you've kind of mixed it in, it's kind of come together. Will get stuck on you. That's okay. Okay, so you don't need to knead it for too long because you're going to be resting it, and then when you come back to it it'll be much easier to knead and it'll have relaxed a bit, and even though it's quite sticky at this point, it'll be much easier to work with. I haven't added all of the milk and the oil mixture this time, just because I didn't feel like it needed it. There we go, and then you just put that to the side, cover it with a damp towel or with some cling film, and then just leave it for an hour, and then get on with the rest of the meal. It works quite well. So I tend to use a rasp grater for mincing garlic and ginger, just because it gets me the fineness that I want. And it's also super useful as a tool in the kitchen. I use it for zesting any citrus fruit, for hard cheeses, and for anything like this. You can also use it for nutmeg, if you need like small bits of nutmeg for your chai, or if you want to make yourself some warm milk in the evening, or just to put on top of food basically. And this one's also less likely to cut you than a box grater. Weigh your ginger and see how much you've got. So I've got 118 grams. And you want to do about 1% basically salt. So say you've got 118 grams, you wouldn't want more than 1 gram of salt. Okay, so now you've added your 1% salt, you just want to pop it in a jar. Or something, anything really, get on the bowl. Something you can put a lid on really, because you don't want too much air getting to it. You got this colour, and go a slightly darker brown. Okay, now you can see that it peels off really easily. So carrying on with the garlic, now that you have it all peeled, there are several ways of doing it. It's kind of the same as before. Using a fine bit of your box grater, you can grate your garlic. And if you're finding that any of the skin isn't grating, on either the rasp grater or the box grater, just leave it until the end and you can mince it up with the rest of your garlic separately. You want to cut this in a sweeping motion, in an arc basically. So if you just keep your hands completely on top, you don't want anything going below because you might cut your fingers. You want to hold your knife, thumb on one side, pinching it with your fingers on the other, and then keep the tip of the blade in one point, and then make an arc. And then move it again, and repeat the same motion. Move it again, repeat the same motion, and at this point most of it will be small enough, you can go in. And this just bruises and breaks the cell walls of the garlic, releasing the allicin, which is what, you know, the pungent garlic taste that we want. And then we just pop this into our jar or our cup. And I just want to weigh this, find out however much it weighs, and put in 1% of that weight. So the next thing we're going to do is the fajitas. Normally I like to use 3 different colours: green, red and yellow. This would have been my green pepper, but it's now ripened and gone orange because it's about a week and a half old. Then we'll use about 1, but we might use a bit more depending on how much it turns out when it cooks down. And maybe 2 of these yellow ones because they're small. Then I like to use sliced brown onions. You can use red, but they're more expensive, and we're trying to keep this as cheap and like accessible as possible. And then mushrooms. You can use any kind of mushroom really. You just want to kind of cut it down into a similar sort of thickness as the slices of pepper, as the onions. You can use flat mushrooms if you cut them into wedges. You can use shiitakes if you want a bit more umami. You can use oyster if you want a bit more chewy. But these ones, super cheap, you can get them anywhere. So yes, so I'm going to start prepping these. I'm just popping them all into one bowl because they're all going at the same time. And you want them all, as I said, about the same thickness. So we're going to slice everything basically. And we'll start with the peppers. So I'd say you want everything in like 1 centimetre thick strips. Quantities in this recipe are a bit of a guideline really. If you find that you don't really like peppers and you just want mushrooms, then add less peppers, add no peppers, add more onions, more mushrooms, etc. In here is about roughly, I think 150 or 200 grams of chestnut mushrooms. 1 green, 1 red and 2 small yellow peppers. Oh, and 2 brown onions. The best way to prep the onion is to leave the root on. If you take and cut the root off before you're slicing it, you'll find you're gonna cry more. We just trim off the tip, score the sides along the lines of the onions. no crying. Beautiful. We've cut all the veg, we're going to mix together the spices. Today we're going to be doing a double of the recipe that is on there, just so that there's some extra spice mix left over. So this is 1 tablespoon of oregano, 1 tablespoon of smoked paprika and 1 teaspoon of sweet paprika. Half a tablespoon of garlic powder, half a tablespoon of onion powder, 1/4 teaspoon to half a teaspoon of turmeric, a teaspoon of cumin, half a teaspoon of ground coriander, 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, and then these are all optional. You can add them if you want. So 1/4 teaspoon of ground pepper, a pinch of ground cinnamon, and a pinch of chili powder. And then something you can also add, if you have something that will work, is a bouillon cube. So an OXO cube or one of those Knorr cubes, not one of the jelly ones, but one of the like solid powdery cubes. Just helps with adding a little bit more flavour straight in, so you don't have to add anything in that's liquid. It's just ready to go, and you can take this. I mean, we take this spice mix with us camping and anywhere really, and it just helps make food taste better on the go. And then to help with making the veg more crispy, to get a better coating, I like to add between a teaspoon and a tablespoon of corn flour. If you have a coffee grinder or any kind of blender at home, it'd be better to just add everything in, blend it like that. Be a bit more homogenised then. If you're just mixing it like this, it'll also be fine, but if you'll just ensure that every single bit is like mixed together, it'll just mean that all the flavours are kind of mixed evenly, and you're adding it all into your food. Cool. So to cook the veg, you want some extra virgin olive oil or some sunflower oil or something similar, something either that tastes nice or has a high smoking point. You want a medium-high heat, warm the oil up. So now that the oil is hot, and almost the same viscosity as water, you know that it's ready for vegetables. Be careful for oil spitting. It smells so good. Okay, so normally I would use a shallower and wider frying pan, something with a larger surface area, meaning that I can flash fry everything. A wok would also work, you just want to fry everything quickly. This is the only frying pan we have in the hub today. What that means is that we're getting basically like the veg is stewing, and we're getting this juice at the bottom. It just means that it's going to take longer for it to cook, for that to cook down and for us to start getting the browning that we want. Probably won't have to deal with this at home, so just use a larger frying pan, something a bit wider, possibly go a bit hotter, and if possible, if you have one, use a wok. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so the next thing we're going to make is a plum and tomato salsa. You don't have to use plums, you could use pears, you could use strawberries. I've used strawberries, pears, nectarines, peaches before, and they've all worked really well. You just want something sweet, basically. You probably could just make this, and people normally would just make this with tomato and onion, but it's nice to have something sweet in to kind of accentuate the tartness, to accentuate the herbs, the saltiness, like all the different flavours kind of balanced together. So we're going to use plums today. I'm also using plum tomatoes, and I'm just quartering them. Then we've got a whole red onion. And for that you want to finely chop it, the root intact, trim off the top, slice it thinly up until the root but not through it, and then going across the other way, chop it finely. So I'm just going to do that now. Mince it finely, so if you just pinch it in a bunch, hold it all together that way, and then if you do the same motion as you did before for the garlic and for the ginger, and just in a sweeping arc in a few different directions. Minced coriander, and that's about 15 grams. I love the taste of coriander, but a few people unfortunately have the gene that means that it tastes like soap. So if you're not a fan of it, you can add mint, you can add basil, you can add parsley, you can add dill if you wanted. Anything green, anything herbal basically. It just adds a little bit of oomph. You don't want it to be plain. You need the green as well for a pop of colour. And then we're going to roughly chop these tomatoes. These ones were donated from someone in Aber who had a glut, but any vine tomatoes, any cherry tomatoes really will do. It's good to have the different colours, but even so, just using red ones will be fine. You don't need to de-seed them or trim them. Just cut them into 8 if you're using vine tomatoes, or cut them into quarters if you're using cherry or plum, and then roughly chop them. So all of the veg should be cooked about now. Ideally, if you're using a wok or a shallow frying pan, you'd have a bit more colour. All of the onions, as you can see, are soft and translucent. The peppers are all soft as well if you were to bite into them, and the mushrooms are all cooked through as well. Now I'm going to mix in a heaped spoonful. This is just any spoonful would do really, but a soup spoonful, a dessert spoonful, even just a heaped tablespoon will be fine. And just mix it through. Something that we'd cook at home for like events, for parties, say for Christmas or something, or someone's birthday. We do fajitas just because everybody can eat it. You can make it vegan. I think I'm going to add a little bit more. About another half spoonful, and that should be enough now. Now that you've added the spice mix, you want to add a little bit of the garlic and the ginger paste. It's better to add these things at the end, because otherwise there's a risk that the garlic and the ginger can burn. So I'm thinking I'm going to add about a teaspoon of the garlic and maybe 1/4 of a teaspoon of the ginger. And this is just warming now on residual heat. So to prepare the plums, you want to cut them in half, and if they're ripe enough they should twist and open up and you can take the stones out. If not, you can just cut around them. Cut the plums up. We're going to cut them in half and then chop them roughly. You can obviously make things a bit finer if you want to. I like my salsas chunky. I like to be able to see everything as a separate thing, but you can also cut things up a bit finer. So normally I'd use lime juice, but you can also use orange or lemon. Today we're using lemon. I'm also going to cut some up for serving, just because the acidity helps with cutting through the spice if you find that it's a little bit too spicy for you. But we are also going to put some lemon juice into the salsa. So I'd say about half a lemon should be fine. So you want to remove the pips first. And then finally some green onions. These ones are a bit longer than the ones you get in the supermarket. So I'd say for me I'm going to be using 2, but at home, if you're getting any from the supermarket, you'd want to use 3. Trim them as you would normally. Scraps can go into stocks or whatever. And then we're going to use both the white and the green part. So if you cut them into manageable lengths, and then we're just going to slice them thinly. And then for seasonings, I tend to stick with the basics. You've already got some acidity in there, but a good thing to do is just taste it, see if you want it a bit more sour, add a bit of vinegar. I tend to just add a little bit of sugar, a little bit of salt, and then vinegar or lime juice if it needs it. So that's about half a teaspoon. And then with the sugar, I'd say about a teaspoon. This is all to taste, obviously, like if you prefer it fat in these, you can just leave it as fresh fish and it'll be fine. And then just give it a taste. I'd say for that one, I'm going to leave it for 5 minutes and decide if I want to add a bit more lemon juice, but other than that, it's all we have left now is the tortillas. So you want to put some plain flour down on your work surface. You want to make sure it's clean beforehand. You don't need to knead it for too long. You just want to make sure that it's fully incorporated. And a smooth dough. And you'll notice that from when you mixed this dough together to now, it's much more elastic, much more smooth. So I'd say 5 to 10 minutes is good for kneading. Best to set a timer, put some music on, maybe even get your kids to do it. There are several different ways of kneading. I'm using one hand for the force, my dominant hand, and one hand, my left hand, as the pivot to make sure that I get all of it. Can be a bit more forceful. I know that some people like to throw their dough, but there's really no need for this. At this point, I'm stretching the dough a bit more. So as I knead, I'm rolling it a bit. I'm folding that bit of dough that I've stretched back in. There we go, it's done. It's cute. And at this point, you just want to separate it out. So you put them into a sausage, like so. A knife or something, just cut them in half. These will make quite small tortillas, but that does mean that you can have more of them and feel fine about it. You get them as round as possible basically before you roll them out. So you want to get them into a ball. Okay, so now that we've got the dough rolled out into balls, you just want to flatten it with your hands. And then get whatever you're going to use to roll it out. So I'm using a bottle of vinegar. But a rolling pin will do, if that's what you've got. And as with a rolling pin, you just want to flour. You want to flour the surface, and you want to flour whatever you're using to roll out, and to make sure that the tortilla doesn't stick to it. But don't use too much flour, because then you'll end up drying out the dough. We'll get to a point where you can stretch it out by hand, like with pizza dough. You don't want it to be see-through. I'd say a few millimeters in thickness, it should be fine. The thinner you roll it out, the crispier it'll be. Obviously the faster it'll cook, the more you've got to watch it to make sure that it doesn't dry out and become unusable as a tortilla for filling. So you want to pop your frying pan or flatbed pan on a medium high heat. I have this one on 5 out of 6. You want to heat the pan up, pop your tortilla in. No need for any oil. The oil in the dough will help crispen it up. And then you just cook it until it browns on one side, flip it over, cook it on the other, and then repeat with the rest of the 7 of the tortillas. If you want to stack up your tortillas so that you have them in advance for popping them on, you want to put a layer of corn flour or a layer of flour on top of the first one, and then just pop them on top. And then you can cover them the same as the little balls of dough with a damp towel. So to assemble, if you're having any salad, then you'd want to put that down first. So a few torn up bits of lettuce and some cucumber would do, or some fresh tomato. We have our salsa today, so a few spoonfuls. Not too much, because otherwise you won't be able to fold up your tortilla. Then I like to add in my yogurt, or creme fraiche, just a few drizzles. You can also smear this straight onto the tortilla. And then your fajita mixture. And then if you want to, a few squeezes of lemon juice or lime juice. Then to fold up, there are several ways of doing it. We tend to at home fold up so there's kind of like a bum, then fold in on one side, fold in on the other, and then eat from the open end down.